What is going on, everybody? So this video is about futures games, which refers to the use of games to explore the futures, one of the most exciting trends in futures and foresight. In fact, a lot of foresight practitioners and consultants are increasingly using futures games as a form of foresight, and for good reasons, because futures games can really increase learning and engagement with scenarios. So in this video, I'll share with you my top 3 futures games, and that is the Polak game, the Sarkar game, and the 2x2 scenario exploration system. Why have I chosen these games? Well, because they are very powerful, very participatory, and most importantly, they are all easily replicable in any workshop for organizational foresight. So let's talk about futures games, but before we start, just a disclaimer, this video is based on evidence and you will find all the evidence I've used to create this video in the description box down below. In that box you will also find a more detailed version of this video in written form if you want to dig deeper into the subject. So let's jump right in. Okay, so the first futures game I want to share with you is the Polak game. The Polak game is a standing game, and that means that it is simply played by standing around. The Polak game was developed by Peter Hayward and Joseph Voros at Swinburne University, and it has been used by dozens of practitioners ever since. The game was inspired by a book called The Image of the Future by Fred Polak, and that's why the name of the game. Let's take a closer look at what this game is about. The game draws from Polak's intuition that people can have one of 4 major worldviews about the world around them. They can be optimist but things are considered changeable, that is, influence optimist. They can be optimist and things are considered not changeable, that is, essence optimist. They can be pessimist but things are considered changeable, that is, influence pessimist. And finally, they can be pessimist and things are considered unchangeable, that is, essence pessimist. So because these 4 worldviews can be plotted on a 2x2 matrix, the game basically consists in locating workshop participants in one of the 4 corresponding quadrants of the matrix and then in using this for learning. To practice the game, we have to go through 3 steps. In the first step, workshop participants are told to step on an imaginary line in the middle of the workshop room. One extreme of the line corresponds to the worldview that things in the world are getting better overall, the other to the worldview that things in the world are getting worse overall. Participants should stand in the place on the line that corresponds to their personal experience of the world around them. The strongest they feel about either of the 2 worldviews, the closer to the extreme of the line they should move to. In the second step, participants are told to either step forward or backward. They should step forward if they think that the causes of the state of things in the world are the actions of human beings. And they should step backward if they think that the causes of the state of things in the world are larger forces beyond human beings. Again, the strongest they feel about either of the 2 positions, the further they should move forward or backward. Finally, in the third step, while still standing, participants are encouraged to have a conversation about the game. They might actually feel strongly about individuals standing in other quadrants. The key here is to ask questions that would make them think about their position and others. For example, what do you think that person is missing? Or where are your clients? As a consequence of this conversation, participants may or may not change their worldview and thus move around the room. Okay, so the Polak game can be a very powerful method to induce foresight learners into the right mindset required for foresight without actually saying so. In fact, a lot of basic principles of futures and foresight are naturally built into the game. These are, for example, the fact that one's worldview about the future is only one of many possible worldviews about the future, the fact that one can change his or her worldview about the future, and the fact that one has to embrace and dialogue with other worldviews about the future. On the top of that, if the Polak game is practiced with all participants from the same organization, it can also prompt them towards a shared worldview about the future. So these are the reasons why I recommend using the Polak game as an icebreaker at the very beginning of a first ed project to introduce first ed learners to these very basic and essential principles of futures and first ed in an interactive manner. But the game is not without faults, of course. For example, participants might stand at the point in the room where it would please others rather than where it would reflect their own real worldview about the future. So in other words, the game is subject to a fair degree of social desirability. To prevent this, we should repeatedly remind participants to attain to their opinions alone when playing the game. And secondly, the game can also cause misunderstandings over time horizon and geographical boundaries. For example, a participant of the game might think that the game refers to 100 years from now, but another participant might think that the game refers to 5 years from now. So to prevent these misunderstandings, we have to be very clear about these aspects when we deliver the instructions of the game. Okay, so let's move on to the next futures game. The second futures game I want to share with you is the Sarkar game. The Sarkar game is a standing and role-playing game. It was also initially developed by Peter Hayward and Joseph Voros at Swinburne University, but it was later applied and documented more extensively by Sohail Inayatullah. Let's take a closer look at what this game is about. The game was inspired by the Indian philosopher and macro historian P.R. Sarkar. That is why the name of the game. Specifically, based on an analysis of history, Sarkar proposed that human societies repeatedly go through 4 distinct but sequential stages, each of which has a dominant class and a dominant ideology. These are the workers' stage, the warriors' stage, the intellectuals' stage, and the capitalist stage, in this order. Once a full cycle is over, a new cycle starts again. Each stage or class has both progressive but also regressive aspects. For example, warriors can protect others but also kill them. Capitalists can distribute wealth but also appropriate it, etc. In the periods of transition between the stages, there is usually a revolution. However, Sarkar also suggested that this 4 stages cycle can be transcended by a new class that incorporates the progressive aspects of all the others, which he called Sadvipra, although this has not happened yet. For Sarkar, Sadvipra is the hidden force that moves each class into the next stage and that will eventually also transcend the cycle. Now, because these concepts can apply not just to human societies at large, but also to individual and organizational development, the Sarkar game plays with this and essentially draws from Sarkar's theory of social change by assigning workshop participants 4 roles corresponding to the 4 stages, with the unspoken intent that they would have to transcend their assigned roles and ultimately achieve Sadvipra. Practicing the game consists in 3 steps. In the first step, workshop participants are divided in 4 groups: the workers, the warriors, the intellectuals, and the capitalists. Each group stands at each corner of the workshop room, while the facilitator stands in the middle of the room. Each group is also given a different set of tools. Workers are given labor tools, warriors are given plastic guns, intellectuals are given books, and capitalists are given prop money. The groups are also given 4 different scripts to help them relate to their respective roles. In the second step, each group is told to enter the game one after the other in the order of the Sarkar cycle of social change. Groups are made to interact in response to requests and claims of other groups. The facilitator introduces each new group intuitively when the conversation becomes stagnant or dysfunctional. Questions such as, what do you need or want from that group, can move the conversation forward. Finally, in the third step, when all groups are interacting with each other, the game will reach either collapse and simulated violence, or some form of resolution between the groups, at which point the facilitator can end the game and call for a debriefing. In the debriefing, the concept of Sadvipra is introduced, and it is revealed to the participants that they were supposed to understand how the four classes fit together as a whole and to create collaborative solutions to problems. Participants are encouraged to reflect on how they have played their roles, whether or not they have achieved sadvipra. So the Sarkar game is also a very powerful method that taps into these four universal archetypes and the conflict between them to enable first-ed workshop participants to see hidden power dynamics and also to communicate the need for collaboration and leadership in order to transcend dysfunctional power dynamics. This is particularly the case when the game is practiced in an organization that has failed to collaborate during the game. In fact, the game can shed light on what specific stage of the Sarkar cycle the organization is at, so it may point towards what needs to be done in order to transcend that position. And these are the reasons why I recommend using the Sarkar game after the creation of scenarios and before the transition from scenarios to strategy. And this is because the game can ease participants into the right mindset required for the collaborative problem solving needed when we translate scenarios into strategies. Now, this being said, remember that this learning goal of the game is achieved only if a major assumption of the game is supported. And that assumption is that the power dynamics uncovered in the game reflect the day-to-day power dynamics of the organization where the game is practiced. Now, unfortunately, the game is often prone to having this assumption violated. And this can happen for a number of reasons. First, even if the game script has been claimed to be neutral, some words in the script, such as disrupt, chaos, or dominate, etc., might inadvertently induce participants to act in accordance to such words due to priming, which is a very well-known psychological phenomenon. And also, because the discussions between the four groups in the game can be emotionally led, some participants might simply reflect daily moods and emotions into the game. So if the assumption of congruence between the gameplay and reality is not met because of these reasons, as may often be the case, instead of reaching understanding of actual but hidden power dynamics within an organization, the game may in fact obfuscate power dynamics and fuel misunderstandings. So we have to be extra careful about this. Okay, so how do we make sure that the gameplay equals to reality assumption is met so that we can reap the full benefits of the game? Well, first, use a version of the script that is as neutral as possible. Secondly, make sure to question participants on whether what is surfaced in the game really reflects the day-to-day power dynamics of the organization where the game was practiced. And if not, just tell them to discard the findings of the game, and as a facilitator, you will still be able to have a very interesting conversation about power thanks to the game. And lastly, you can change the game a bit by making its implicit objective, and that is achieving sadvipra, known to the participants beforehand, or by having the game played by only half of the participants while the other half just observes the game, so that the observing half will be more likely to see the necessity of sadvipra. These variations of the game are more likely to prevent confusing or perverse gameplays. Alright, let's move on to the last futures game. The last futures game I want to share with you is the 2x2 scenario exploration system, otherwise known as 2x2 CES. 2x2 CES was developed by Gianni at the Center for Post-Normal Policy and Future Studies as a simplification of a more complex futures game previously developed by the Joint Research Center of the European Commission. Unlike the original game, which was applicable only to one set of scenarios, the 2x2 CES is actually applicable to any 2x2 scenario project. That's right, any. And that's really the strength of the game, and also the reason why it's called 2x2 CES. The game features scenario explorers, and that is players, who play the scenarios one scenario at a time. Players choose fictional roles and use fictional resources in the form of cards and tokens to achieve fictional objectives in each scenario. Playing the game actually consists of several steps, so let's take a closer look at the gameplay. First, the facilitator introduces the game, tells players to choose a scenario to play on a 2x2 matrix, and explains how the game board reflects the scenario they have chosen. That is, players move into the future of the chosen scenario from left to right, and the far right point of the board is the time horizon of the foresight project. Second, the facilitator tells players to choose fictional roles that they will play in the scenario, and to write a vision that they will pursue under their roles on a vision card. These cards have to be placed on the far right point of the board. Third, the facilitator tells players to officially begin the game by sequentially playing one action card per player. Action cards are basically fictional moves that would bring each player closer to their respective vision. Fourth, the facilitator tells players to vote on the significance of the action cards played using impact tokens. And fifth, impact tokens are counted, and the player who got the highest number of tokens will have the right to play a disruption card that will significantly change the stakes of the game. Conceptually, these disruption cards are like wildcards, and on a side note, you can check out this video to know more about wildcards and their role in scenarios. Now, these last three steps, that is, action cards, impact tokens, and disruption card, which are basically one round of the game, are repeated until the far right end of the board is reached. When this occurs, each player counts the accumulated number of impact tokens they got throughout the whole game, and the player who got the highest number of tokens overall can be considered the winner. Finally, in the last step, players are encouraged to discuss about the gameplay and to see past the win-lose dynamics at the end of the game. In fact, players are told that winning was not the point of the game, as they may have both won and lost several times throughout the many rounds of the game, which better resembles reality. Instead, players are encouraged to discuss about which unexpected actions of other players drew them closer or further from their vision. And then the whole gameplay can be repeated in the same manner in another scenario or more of the 2x2 matrix while maintaining the same roles and visions. And by the way, if you want to know how practicing the game looks like in an in-person foresight workshop, I suggest you take a look at this video. So I believe that the 2x2 chess is really the most powerful and comprehensive futures game available out there. And that is because it goes beyond communicating several basic principles of futures and foresight. Yes, it communicates the fact that foresight is not about prediction, but about different future scenarios. It communicates the fact that although we might have some resources in the present, we have to prepare for several futures, which might in turn change our resources. And it communicates the necessity to collaborate with several stakeholders to walk towards a shared vision together. But on the top of that, and beyond other futures game, it communicates all these principles by first-handedly and realistically engaging players inside scenarios. This idea of playing inside scenarios is absent in other games, and it's really valuable because when players explore the scenarios, they get to think what scenarios mean for themselves, so they understand the scenarios and they remember the scenarios. On the top of that, the game can be used to achieve a number of objectives. Besides learning about scenarios, which is a default objective any application of the game will achieve, the game can be used in corporate foresight to simulate strategies in a set of previously created scenarios by role-playing competitors. It can be used in governmental foresight to spur social transformation by involving key stakeholders in a society at large as players. It can be used to enhance negotiating skills in schools. And it can even be used as a solid scenario building method by reworking the gameplays into storylines for the scenarios. The only disadvantage I have to mention of 2x2 chess is that it requires more resources than the Sarkar game and the Polak game. In fact, if Sarkar and Polak can be played in about 20 minutes, the 2x2 chess requires half day or even a full day of play. Facilitating the game also requires a lot of instructions on a number of details of the gameplay, but all in all, these limitations can be managed and they are certainly counterbalanced by the many benefits of the game. So in conclusion, which game should we use? Well, as always, the choice depends on the context and expected outcomes. As a general rule of thumb, the Polak game is used as an icebreaker at the very beginning of a foresight project or as a playful energizer between foresight sessions to emphasize basic principles of futures and foresight. The Sarkar game is used after scenarios to ease participants into strategizing by resolving dysfunctional power dynamics in an organization when present. And finally, 2x2 chess is used as a full-fledged foresight session after the creation of scenarios, or even as a substitute of scenario building to increase conversation and engagement with scenarios. By no means these are the only futures games available out there. There are many other valuable futures games. Yet by and large, these are just what I found to be the best games. And this is because many futures games are simply designed for specific projects, so they're not replicable, and also because many futures games actually just feature a combination of cards of different categories or simply sets of questions. So to me, that is not an engaging gameplay. The games I've just discussed do not have these problems. They're highly replicable, highly engaging. So I really hope that you liked this video and that it helped you to know more about futures games and their role in futures and foresight. If you want to dig deeper into the subject, just take a look at the article in the description box down below, and also don't forget to subscribe to my channel and hit the bell button so that you will be notified when I post my next video. And I'll see you there. Bye!